Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my quarterback, tight end, and defensive rankings for Week 8. We're going to start at quarterback, where there are a lot of injuries, actually, but mainly to lower-end options. Andy Dalton, not expected to play. Neither is Derek Carr, Aiden O'Connell. Will Levis has practice. He's questionable, but at the moment, I didn't rank him. And then Deshaun Watson is out for the year. So let's get going. At number 1, I think it's pretty obvious Lamar Jackson has been a true stud. He is going against the Browns this week, and he's on pace for another MVP at this point. He's the quarterback 1 in fantasy, 25.4 points per game, 17 total touchdowns, 6 turnovers, and 65 rushing yards per game through 7 weeks. So he's on fire. He's so dominant. No one's ever benching Lamar this year. Number 2, though, a player who's been really good. I have Jordan Love at the Jags here at number 2. Jordan Love has missed 2 games, but he's also second in the NFL in touchdown passes this season with 15 touchdown passes. That's tied with Lamar. He also has 8 interceptions, but he's also second in passing yards per game with an average of 270. That's only behind Geno Smith, and his numbers are very safe. He's actually a top 5 fantasy quarterback this year in points per game. He's averaging 20.2 per game. Josh Allen right above him at 20.3. Love is a must start already, but here he gets the best matchup in the NFL. The last 5 games, Jacksonville is giving up 26.7 points per game to opposing quarterbacks, an average of 300 yards per game, 15 passing touchdowns, only 1 interception, and 31 rushing yards. The only thing that could possibly slow them down is if they overlook this opponent and just look ahead to the Lions matchup next week. But I don't imagine that happens. I'm not worried about it. Love will play excellent, and he's a top 2 quarterback, in my opinion, this week. At number 3, I'm going out on a limb here, trusting my gut and ranking Patrick Mahomes at Las Vegas as a must start. He's been awful this season, averaging 13.6 points per game, actually ranks as quarterback 26 this year, and that's right between Aaron Rodgers and Daniel Jones. He's worse than Trevor Lawrence and Bo Nix this season in fantasy with only 6 passing touchdowns and 6 turnovers in 6 games. Las Vegas does rank as a top 12 matchup the last 5 games, but they have only given up over 250 passing yards to one person this season. So nothing actually indicates that I should be ranking Mahomes this high, except for the fact that he's a 2-time MVP, back-to-back champion, going for a 3-peat, has 3 rings already, hasn't lost a game since Christmas last year, and it was to these same Raiders with Aiden O'Connell as the quarterback. Oh, and someone also brought a Kermit the Frog puppet to training camp, and that clip went viral. You know Mahomes will get his revenge. They were already going to dominate after losing to them on Christmas, but now there's a lot of extra skin in the game. They just had a bye 2 weeks ago. They probably whip out the Taylor Swift trick play this week and probably go ring around the rosy. There's going to be like multiple opportunities for them to embarrass the Raiders. So I expect them to showcase Xavier Worthy this week. Travis Kelce probably has a good game. And they also just traded for DeAndre Hopkins. So now that he's on the team, Mahomes has enough weapons to get it done. I think he goes off. I think if you bench him this week, you're making a very bad decision. They could legitimately drop 50 points if time permits. So I expect the Chiefs to dominate. I think Mahomes will have his best game of the season, and while I don't trust him rest of year, I think after this game you probably want to shop him for a trade. He's been shit. I do think this week he will be top 5. I have him at number 3. I don't think this is the week to be benching Patrick Mahomes, but I understand if you want to bench him. He has sucked since last year. Number 4, I have Josh Allen at Seattle, and with the addition of Amari Cooper, any long-term concerns you had for this passing offense are gone. Josh Allen has completely cleaned up the mistakes as well this season. He has yet to throw an interception this season, and he's always a stud. He's running the ball less this year, but he's still an elite top-tier quarterback. The Seattle Seahawks do have some good corners, but they rank as a top 12 matchup. There are no concerns for Allen in this game. He probably puts up another 20 points pretty easily. Last week, he threw for 300 yards against the Titans, a pretty good secondary. So I trust him. He's definitely still a lock in your lineup. Number 5, I'm going with Jalen Hurts at Cincinnati this week, and considering A.J. Brown has missed half of the season, I do think Hurts has still been pretty good, at least in fantasy, where in 3 of his games this year, he has surpassed 20 fantasy points, and only 1 game with less than 16. So his rushing touchdowns came back to him. They're still a part of his game this season. And despite Devontae Smith definitely fading overall in the offense this year, the A.J. Brown deep ball is still consistent. And the Bengals are a top 4 matchup, giving up an average of 21.3 points per game in their last 5 games to opposing quarterbacks, 261 yards per game, 9 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. But where I am excited for Hurts this week is they also give up 41 rushing yards per game. That's among the highest in the NFL, and Jalen Hurts will be very good in the run department in this matchup. So he's going to put up numbers. I'm not worried about it. I think you've been gaining some confidence in him lately, especially with A.J. Brown back on the field. I still think Hurts is a top 5 quarterback. Number 6, in the same matchup, I have Joe Burrow versus the Eagles. He's averaging 19.4 points per game this year. That's quarterback 6 in points per game. And Philadelphia does rank as a bottom 7 matchup. At the moment, it's not great, but a lot of their success has also been matchup driven. They had the Giants last week and the Browns the week before. I don't think that the rookies they have in the secondary are actually going to stop Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins. So no downgrade at all in my opinion, because both his receivers are playing like top 10 guys and only injury can slow them down. However, Higgins is a game time decision. He is dealing with a quad injury that cropped up in practice Friday, and that's really not good news. When he's been game time decisions in the past, even when he plays, sometimes he exits after like 5 snaps. So I'm actually not convinced T. Higgins even suits up at all this week. So if that is the case, I will be lowering Burrow in the rankings. But up until Friday, I was expecting Higgins to start and thought Burrow would be a smash play. So I still rank him here as a guy you're starting. But at number 6, I kind of feel like I will be dropping him if we get some clarity on T. Higgins going into the game if it doesn't look like he will suit up. So that's not good, but still with Ja'Marr Chase, I expect a high floor. I still think Burrow is at worst a top 12 quarterback this week. At number 7, I love Caleb Williams this week at Washington. They did shut down the Panthers in week 7, but on the year, they rank as a top 7 matchup for fantasy quarterbacks. I'm not worried. And last year, DJ Moore absolutely torched them for over 230 yards and 3 touchdowns. Off the bye, I also think Rome Odunze is going to have a big game here. They'll try to establish the rookie more in this offense as the weeks go by. Cole Kmet also looking like a stud recently, and DeAndre Swift offers a lot of yak potential as well. I didn't even mention Keenan Allen. So everything that we hoped for is coming together for Caleb in this offense, and he's been making steady progress consistently every single week. He is getting better. So off the bye, I think he'll take even bigger of a step forward, and it's a marquee matchup here against the number 1 and number 2 overall pick. I think Caleb is going to play very well, silence some of the doubters, and if Daniels is healthy, there is shootout potential as well. So I see a very high ceiling. I genuinely think 30 points is in play for Caleb this week. Considering this is the first time I rank him in the top 10, Caleb Williams is my start of the week. I think he's going to be fantastic against the Commanders in Washington. At number 8, in the same game, I have Jayden Daniels versus Chicago, who is questionable dealing with a rib injury, but he did practice on Friday, so it sounds like he will be available. It's not a good matchup at all, though, against Chicago. It is the worst in the NFL. Over the last 5 games, against quarterbacks, Chicago is only allowing 10.1 points per game. Really brutal numbers. 217 passing yards per game, only 3 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. It is rough against Jalen Johnson and all of the good players on that Bears defense. So I do worry about it a little bit, especially with the rib injury. I don't expect him to have his best game of the season. He definitely deserves a downgrade here, but he's been so good this season. I still think you're starting him. They're not that great against the run, so I do think he'll be fine in terms of rushing stats, but he could take a bad hit and get ruled out once again. It's possible the rib injury crops up once more. So back in the offseason, my concern for Daniels was his longevity, if he would fail to remain available all season long, and already he's banged up. I'm a little concerned he is not 100% in this game, and it really impacts him for fantasy. The matchup's also very scary, but he's just been so good this year when healthy. I think as long as he plays, he's still in your lineup. At quarterback 8, I would still start him, but I do kind of feel like I'm a little high with this ranking. Number 9, Jared Goff versus Tennessee. I don't really care about the bad matchup. The Titans have a tough secondary, but they also just allowed over 300 passing yards to Josh Allen last week. And Goff is on a heater. I want to trust the hot hand. In his last 3 games, he is averaging 23.2 points per game, 296 yards per game, 7 passing touchdowns, no interceptions at all, and a touchdown reception of his own. So he's got one of the safest floors at the position you can find right now. However, the matchup he gets just isn't that good, but I don't think it's worth benching him. While they only allow 175 passing yards per game and Jameson Williams just got suspended, I still think Goff will be fine. The Lions are humming right now, and they should handle business easily at home. I don't think they look ahead to the Packers game in Week 9 and completely skip out on their offensive production this week. So Goff has just been so good lately. I have to trust him. I want to ride the hot hand and keep starting him in my lineup. He's been excellent the last 3 games. Number 10, I have Dak Prescott at San Francisco. And last year, Dak Prescott became an MVP candidate because of the quarterback play he put up after the Week 7 bye. Dallas is off their Week 7 bye again, and I expect the connection with him and CeeDee Lamb to be on lock rest of the year. I do not think it'll be as bad as it has been up to this point. Jake Ferguson has also yet to find the end zone. I think that probably changes pretty soon, and Dak will have his elite upside back very, very quickly. I think this is a very competitive game as well in primetime versus San Francisco. Often embarrassing loss to the Lions. They will put up a good fight. I'm not convinced they win, but he doesn't have to win the game to play well in fantasy. So I expect good numbers for Dak this week. I think he could approach 300 yards. And although the matchup against the Niners is bottom 10, I kind of don't care. I think they will play well and bounce back from that Lions loss a couple games ago. So Dak will be fine. I think he's top 10. I think his upside returns to him rest of season. At number 11, though, in the same game, I have Brock Purdy versus Dallas, and he does lose Ayuk for the season. Juwan Jennings remains out this week, but as long as Deebo Samuel and George Kittle are active, I'm not going to worry about Purdy's production. This offense always offers a high fantasy floor. He's usually good for 250, 2 touchdowns most weeks, and he torched the Cowboys last year for 250 and 4 touchdowns. 3 of them went to George Kittle. As long as Kittle is available, I am not going to panic. I'm not going to worry about Purdy. I still think he is a good start rest of season because the offense is going to keep putting up numbers. I trust Kyle Shanahan. I still trust Deebo. And it's not like Ayuk has been good this season. Losing him doesn't really change that much. He also has the rookies Cohen and Pearsall to step up. There will be plenty of usage for Purdy in fantasy rest of year. So he always dominates this matchup. It's a bit of a must win as well. They're currently last in the division, and they'll get back to 500. I do think they win. And also, Dallas is a top 6 matchup this season. In the last 5 games, they've given up 8 passing touchdowns, only 2 interceptions. Purdy will be just fine. I think him and Dak have good numbers in this game. At number 12, I have Tua Tagovailoa versus Arizona. A little bit scary regarding the concussion concerns, but that's really the only risk here if he gets another concussion and exits the game early. It is possible to happen. I wouldn't completely rule it out, but otherwise, he should be back to normal. Justin Herbert just threw for 350 yards against Arizona, throwing to Will Dissly, Jalen Reagor, and Simi Fehoko. So I think that Tua will be excellent throwing to Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Devon Achane this week. I kind of want to rank him even above Jayden Daniels. I could envision a top 5 game from Tua in his first week back. It's definitely a good spot, definitely a feel-good matchup, and I expect everyone to play very well, welcoming him back onto the field. So it's really just the concern that he exits early. That's really the only problem here, but I don't think it happens. He threw for 338 in week 1 against Jacksonville. I think he'll probably come close to that again against Arizona. So I would trust him. I do think he plays well. I'm not so sure about next week, though, in week 9 against Buffalo. That's probably a different story. But in this game, I do think he's top 12. I think he has a very high floor. A lot of yards are incoming for Tua. Number 13, I'm downgrading Kyler Murray this week. I don't think he's a must start at Miami. He did showcase his speed last week when he went untouched on a 40-yard rushing touchdown, but he probably needs that to happen again for him to pay off. Miami is the second worst quarterback matchup in the NFL. Last 5 games giving up only 8.4 points per game. Some of that is matchup driven, but still really bad numbers. Only 165 passing yards per game, 2 touchdowns, 3 picks, 14 rushing yards per game, and 1 rushing touchdown. One reason why they're so good against quarterbacks is because they're terrible against running backs, and a lot of game script does pivot away from passing the ball against the Dolphins. So that's where I'm concerned. They might not need him to throw it very much, but he should put up decent rushing stats here. I think he has a fine floor, but I'm worried about the passing numbers, especially with Marvin Harrison Jr. really not stepping up as of late. I worry about him here against Jalen Ramsey again, and I just don't expect multiple passing touchdowns from Kyler Murray. So bad matchup here, definitely a tough spot, and I don't think he's top 10. The position's very deep though, so I kind of feel like he's still in the same tier as Joe Burrow and Caleb Williams, who I have ranked 6 and 7, but at the bottom of the tier for sure. The matchup is a big downgrade. Number 14, I have Russell Wilson versus the Giants, and this ranking kind of feels a little dumb, but he was excellent against the Jets last week, which has been a tough matchup this season. He's not just playing for his job, he's really playing for his legacy at this point. If he gets benched for Justin Fields, he's probably never going to be a starting quarterback for another team. And I think he can look great in primetime for the second week in a row because the Giants are a top 5 quarterback matchup. Last 5 games, they've allowed 20.1 points per game, 205 yards per game, 9 total touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. I do not think Russell Wilson turns it over in this game. They also give up 35 rushing yards per game, so maybe he flashes his mobility in this game as well. If he plays poorly, it's because he sucks. This matchup is a spot where he should excel. So I expect Pickens to dominate. I think Freiermuth will be decent, and Russ should play pretty well for the second week in a row. Quarterback is very deep this week, but I wouldn't be shocked if he was even better than guys like Goff and Purdy for the second straight week. He put up 25 fantasy points against the Jets last week, and it could continue. I kind of feel like I'm a little too low on Russ. He was a top 14 quarterback last season in Denver, and I kind of feel like he has higher upside in this Steelers offense. So not a bad play. I think he's a legit streamer. If he plays well again, I think you might want to pick him up off the wire. It probably continues rest of the season, but the matchup is the main reason I'm trusting him. The matchup is excellent. Number 15, I'm worried about CJ Stroud though. It's mainly just name value here. Stroud is a guy you drafted very high but has been disappointing. And versus the Colts, it's not the best matchup possible, but it's not as difficult as the Packers matchup. Their defense is very underrated this season, and with Tank Dell offering nothing at all, it makes a lot of sense why he was so bad last week. But I do think he bounces back to a certain degree here. He's probably not going to be as good as in week 1 because Nico Collins remains on IR. The Colts are still a top 8 matchup though, and there is some upside. Their first game against them was mainly Joe Mixon torching them, however. So I'm not convinced that without Nico Collins, he really does offer that top 5 ceiling that we expected when we drafted him. I think he's just a floor play, and after only 86 passing yards last week, it is concerning, but they're returning back home here. I think they'll be fine, and I still think he's a decent floor play, but I do not expect a top 10 performance from Stroud this week. At number 16, it's where I ranked Sam Darnold entering Thursday night's game, and he was okay, no turnovers with 2 touchdowns, but another game with less than 250 yards. You would have thought that given his weapons and this offense, he'd probably throw for more than 225 per game this season. The passing numbers are mainly relying on touchdowns for fantasy. But at number 16, this probably looks like a decent rank. I think he will pay off for you if you started him. 19 points was decent, at least in my scoring format. That's what he put up. Number 17, I have Geno Smith versus Buffalo. And Geno is actually the league's leading passer this season. But with DK Metcalf unlikely to play, it's not guaranteed he misses, but it's not looking good. I don't think his ceiling is available in this game. They're going to need a lot of points to beat Buffalo, though. So just to remain competitive, he will have to throw it a lot. He only has 8 touchdowns in 7 games this season. So Kenneth Walker probably continues to vulture him in the red zone. And his upside is kind of capped because of a lack of touchdowns. But he's a reliable fantasy quarterback this season. The floor is very high. He's averaging 17.4 points per game this year. And Buffalo's an average matchup, so I wouldn't downgrade him too much just because he's without DK Metcalf. He still remains a bust-proof option, but the ceiling is definitely lower without DK. Number 18, very interesting pickup off the wire, is Drake Maye versus the Jets. He does get a bad matchup this week against New York, but even if he turns it over a lot, we saw him put up great stats in garbage time against Houston in his rookie debut. He is very mobile, he runs it a lot, and he's been chucking it like crazy. He has been very good in fantasy through 2 weeks. So I would believe in his upside rest of season. I think he's a very legit pickup, and if it wasn't for the matchup, I'd probably rank him top 15, maybe top 12. He's been really good so far. So I like his upside this week. The floor, though, is pretty low. The Jets rank bottom 5, only allowing 172 yards per game, but only 2 interceptions on the season. So it could be a lot worse. I think Drake Maye still offers a decent floor thanks to his rushing stats, but this is not the week I'm expecting him to go absolutely bananas. I think he's probably capped for like 18 points, but genuinely think he's a solid floor play. Not a bad start in a 2 QB league. Number 19, really interesting play as well, Anthony Richardson at Houston. In week 1 versus them, he was fantastic, 212 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception on only 9 pass completions. He was very efficient. We remember those beautiful deep passes that hit. But he also ran for 56 yards and a touchdown on only 6 rush attempts. He was also very efficient on the ground, but I'm not convinced that all of that efficiency does happen again. The rushing stats are probably what you need to rely on in order to have a good fantasy day from him this week, but it is possible. I wouldn't rule it out entirely. But Jonathan Taylor probably going to have a massive game here, so paired with the risk we've seen from Richardson, I don't think he's a must start. I think you're kind of pressing your luck with him in your lineup, but the upside is elite. I could envision another 30-point game from Richardson against the Texans for the second time in a row. So that's what you're hoping for. If you're desperate enough where all you are seeking is that upside, you don't really care about the lack of floor, I would understand starting Richardson in this game. The Texans are a top 9 matchup against quarterbacks. They've given up 14 total touchdowns, only 4 interceptions over the last 5 games, but all 4 of those interceptions did happen over the last 2 games. So they are figuring things out in the secondary. There is some risk with Richardson. I wish I could trust him, but I just don't think I can. The position's so deep this week. Quarterback 19, I think makes it sound like he'll be a lot worse than I anticipate, but I still think he goes over 16 points. I still think he's a viable starter, just a streaming option though, given his lack of consistency. Number 20, really interesting player as well this week would be Kirk Cousins at Tampa Bay, who has been a terrible fantasy quarterback this season, with the exception of a 500-yard, 4-touchdown game against Tampa Bay that happened in week 5. And this week he gets the Bucs again. So he does deserve an upgrade because of that, but I kind of worry that that first matchup was just a fluke. If you look at his game log this season, it stands out as a massive outlier, not something to trust. So because they won in overtime, I really doubt he gets another 400 plus yards in this game. It's also a must-win situation in regards to divisional seeding for Tampa Bay. So I do worry about it. I do think their defense steps up. Without their top 2 receivers, they have to. And on the road, I don't think they'll be as good as they looked at home a few weeks ago. So I am a little worried about it. I could see some lack of red zone efficiency here, as well as turnovers. Cousins had 3 of them last week against the Seahawks. So I want to bump him up because it's against Tampa and he could go off for another 30 plus points, but he's been really brutal this year. I don't trust him. The floor is not there. And that's why I don't think you have to start him. Just a low end 2 quarterback starter in 1 quarterback leagues. I think Cousins should remain on the bench. Number 21, another player I don't trust but could envision going off this week. It's Aaron Rodgers at the Patriots. He put up over 20 fantasy points in week 3 against the Patriots the first time. And now he has Devontae Adams. It could definitely happen again, but he has not been reliable this season. He is tied with Kirk Cousins with only 13.8 points per game this season. So both players have been brutal. It's just this divisional matchup that they played well in the first time that has you interested. I'm just not willing to press my luck. I think it is too risky. I do not trust the floor for Rodgers. And he's also been turning it over for some reason. That is not like him. So he might just be too old to be the guy we remember. I don't actually want to start Rodgers. I think he's a big liability in your fantasy roster. I would pass in week 8. Number 22, I have Baker Mayfield versus Atlanta, who's been a top 3 quarterback this season, but obviously he loses a lot of value with Evans and Godwin off the field, but he can still move the ball. I do think the floor will be fine for Baker this week. I worry about the touchdown production. However, you really have to trust that Cade Otton and Jalen McMillan can step up. But his running backs also catch passes. Rashad White will get involved, and I do think he'll be okay. This game will be competitive for sure. So I wouldn't write him off completely, but I want to see it before I trust him back inside the top 5. It feels a little too risky to endorse. So Baker probably returns to preseason expectations. Without his top 2 receivers, he's not the same player. Number 23, I was too low on Matthew Stafford this week. I ranked him at 23 because he had been terrible entering this game. But with both of his wide receivers back, he threw for 4 touchdowns. Granted, 2 of them went to Demarcus Robinson. He was wide open multiple times. So Stafford has that ceiling return to him with his receivers back. It's definitely more enticing rest of season, but I don't blame myself for ranking him this low. He had not thrown for multiple touchdowns in any game this season. So you trust him a little bit more rest of year, but he's pretty matchup dependent as well. A lack of rushing value is a concern. You need the touchdowns to hit for him to pay off. So I was too low, but at 23, I wanted to see it first. I can live with this mistake. Number 24, I have Bo Nix versus Carolina, and only now do I think you're actually getting like a bad game in terms of fantasy numbers. Bo Nix was excellent last week. He had 75 rushing yards against the Saints, and I think the rushing stats are really what's carrying him this season. He's been better than Patrick Mahomes in fantasy, thanks to 36 rushing yards per game, as well as 3 rushing touchdowns. That is a very nice boost to your fantasy numbers. So that's what you're hoping for. The Panthers are also terrible against the run, just like the Saints were last week. So I could legitimately see him run for another 50 plus yards in this game. But without the touchdown, you're not going to get much upside. Courtland Sutton disappeared last week. Sutton probably comes back and maybe Bo Nix plays well, but I doubt it. I think he's just a floor play, and outside the top 20, I would bench him this week. But I genuinely kind of want to start Jameis Winston as well. As QB 25, it is probably too risky to bet on, but this matchup is excellent against Baltimore. They rank top 3 in their last 5 games. They've allowed 318 passing yards per game with 12 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions, and a rushing touchdown. We know that Jameis likes to chuck it deep. There is some massive upside. He will make some mistakes, but Njoku is a reliable target for him. If one of Judy or Cedric Tillman can step up as well, I do think Winston will have a decent floor with upside rest of season. He's a very interesting pickup in this offense. However, it's just not safe enough to trust. It's kind of unfortunate. You hate to see a good matchup go to waste, but we've just never seen it for a full game. And while Winston could easily drop 20 plus points this week, he could all do it in garbage time, and he could also throw for like 5 interceptions as well. So not ready to trust him, but I do kind of want to rank him a lot higher. The matchup is great. At 26, I have Justin Herbert versus New Orleans, and I just feel so sorry for Herbert. I am a Charger fan, but I think if you watched Monday's game against Arizona, you understand why he deserves better. He did everything right to win that game, if not for a fumble by Jalen Reagor or the defensive player that fumbled on the goal line as well. The Chargers would have scored a touchdown and they would have won that game, but it didn't happen. So he put up the most impressive 349 yards of his career, honestly. He was throwing to Will Dissly, 3 other tight ends, Jalen Reagor, McConkey, and Palmer didn't really offer that much either. And while he didn't throw a touchdown, 349 in this offense is very impressive. So I think he's still elite, but obviously without any reliable weapons in fantasy, he's just not the guy you want to start. He can't catch a break. And until they draft like an elite option next year at receiver, I don't ever expect his upside to be there. So I really want them to trade for Mike Williams, but even he's not a safe player to stay healthy. It probably doesn't move the needle that much. And this matchup is really good on the ground. It's probably more of a J.K. Dobbins game. I'm not ready to trust Herbert every single week, but last week was very impressive. He deserves some credit. Number 27 would be Trevor Lawrence, who has been better lately, but 13 points against the Patriots reminds you of his risk. Beyond Brian Thomas, the offense mainly relies on Tank Bigsby for big plays. So I'd rather pass on him. The Packers just held Stroud to less than 90 yards passing. They rank as a bottom 6 matchup. I will ignore Trevor Lawrence against the Packers in my lineup. Number 28, I have Mason Rudolph at Detroit. And before last week, I was kind of wondering why they hadn't benched Will Levis yet for Rudolph sooner, but I think he sucks just as bad. Maybe the turnovers aren't as egregious, but Levis probably does offer some more upside. So with no more Hopkins, I'm not going to bet on this offense ever again. Mason Rudolph is a must bench. So is Spencer Rattler, just not safe enough to trust. He will get the start once again. And although Olave and Taysom Hill are back on the field, I just don't trust him at all. The matchup was a bit more difficult last week, but it's also pretty bad against the Chargers. No thank you with Rattler. Number 30, I have Daniel Jones at Pittsburgh, who got benched last week. And against the Steelers this week, it could easily happen again. So fuck no, I'm not trusting Daniel Jones. I'm also not trusting Gardner Minshew against the Chiefs. He probably gets benched himself. They probably put in Ritter at some point. The Chiefs are going to dominate this game. So no fucking chance. And then lastly at number 32, I have Bryce Young at Denver. And I actually think he finishes the game, but he's still the worst quarterback on the week. There's no upside here. Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen are not going to play. So even though Dalton's not available, Surtain is playing and you have to trust Leggett, Jatavian Sanders, and Jonathan Mingo. Fuck no with Bryce Young. But these last 3 players inside the top 35, Ritter, Locke, and Flacco, I could genuinely see all 3 of them having some snaps this week as the backup. I don't think their starter is guaranteed to finish the game. So that's it at quarterback. Let's move on to tight end now, where unfortunately Dallas Goedert is out for the second week in a row. TJ Hawkinson did not get cleared to play on Thursday either. But at number 1, I feel extremely confident in George Kittle versus Dallas. He is questionable, but is practicing. I'm not too worried about it. And last year, he scored 3 touchdowns against the Cowboys on the night before his birthday. So I expect him to go off once again. The team is last in the division. They need this win. And they just lost Ayuk. Debo was just in the hospital. Kittle is the tight end 1 this season with 5 touchdowns in 6 games. He's clearly the best option overall. As long as he's active, he is a lock in your lineup. He'll be the tight end 1 rest of season. Number 2, though, would be David Njoku for me this week versus Baltimore. And Njoku rest of year is going to give Kittle a good run for his money if this target volume continues. With Deshaun Watson gone, you feel a lot more excited about the upside with Jameis Winston, who's probably going to send him 10 plus targets every single week. Last week he had 14 targets, and the elite playmaking ability was showcased last year. Njoku can put up 150 yards any given week. So I think that upside is completely back. We saw what it was like with Flacco. With Jameis, I think he'll be just as good, especially with Amari Cooper no longer in the offense. He's guaranteed to see the most volume in. He's guaranteed for at least 9 plus targets every single week. I do trust Njoku. And against Baltimore, it's a top 7 matchup. They give up 10.9 points per game this season, a lot of yards to the position. So Njoku is a must start, definitely locked into your lineup rest of year. At number 3, I have Brock Bowers versus Kansas City, and Njoku was not the only tight end last week who had 14 targets. Bowers did as well, and he's going to remain a stud tight end all year long. They also traded away his biggest target competition with no more Devontae Adams. I also expect double-digit targets every single week for Bowers, but I don't trust the touchdowns to hit as much as I do for Njoku, and that's the tiebreaker for me. Both of them are excellent. The Chiefs matchup is actually the best on the season. They allow 84 tight end yards per game, but I do think Njoku has slightly higher touchdown odds. That's why this week I do rank Njoku higher. But both players are elite. They're on par with Kittle. These are the 3 tight ends I think are the most valuable rest of season. At number 4, though, I think you have to trust Kmet in your lineup at this point. Damn, he looks good, an average of 13.6 points per game. In his last 4 games, he caught 2 touchdowns the last time we saw him in London. Caleb has a very good connection with him, but expecting multiple touchdowns every week probably isn't the wisest decision, but it's hard to find a ceiling that is higher at tight end. The position is very reliant on touchdowns, and Kmet ranks 3rd in tight end touchdowns this season. I do trust him as a top 10 play every week. He could give you 20 points any given week, and you're not surprised at all. I think the upside is undeniable for Cole Kmet. At number 5, the volume is probably safer with Trey McBride. He's a bit more of a bust-proof option, but he does not have a single touchdown on the season. So he's more of a floor play. I don't see as much upside as Kmet, and that's the tiebreaker, but I see both of them as elite must-starts as well. McBride is averaging 7.5 targets per game. That ranks 2nd only to Brock Bowers, but it also includes that concussion game. And as long as he doesn't come off the field early with injury, you have a 7-point floor from McBride every single week. He has yet to score a touchdown, though. That's the main reason why I don't rank him above Cole Kmet. But as Kyler's number 1 target, he's a lock in your lineup every single week. He's very safe for at least like 7, 8, maybe 9+ targets in this game. Number 6, though, I have Cade Otton versus Atlanta, and he's going to become a workhorse for the foreseeable future. Without just Mike Evans last week, he had 10 targets against Baltimore, 8 catches for 100 yards. He's the de facto number 1 target for Baker Mayfield until Mike Evans gets healthy, and with no Chris Godwin rest of season, I genuinely think Otton might be a top 10 tight end all year long. I just feel so safe about the expected volume for him. He's an immediate must-start option, and you just have to trust the volume. The targets will be there no matter what for Otton this week. At number 7, I have Mark Andrews at Cleveland, and there's 3 games this year where he saw 2 or fewer targets. He was only averaging 0.8 points in those 3 games. In the other 4 games, however, he's averaging 11.7 points per game on 4.5 targets, 3.8 catches, 53 yards per game, and 3 touchdowns. All 3 of those touchdowns have happened in the last 2 games. So the narrative playing against his college quarterback maybe played a factor, but Flowers is banged up, the offense scores at will, and he's still their best target in the red zone. So Andrews, I would consider completely back. I think he's back as a safe option. You can start him with confidence, but only 4.5 targets per game is not the safest volume to bet on. I could envision a scenario where he does burn you again, but that's why I can't rank him back in the top 5 yet. I still think he's top 10, though. He's been really good the last few games, and I do think he will maintain this production moving forward. He was averaging 8 touchdowns per season before this year. Number 8, I have Travis Kelce at Las Vegas, and it's a bit of a gut call. You really have to pick your spots with Travis Kelce this year, but I do think he goes off against the Chiefs. I'm expecting Mahomes to dominate this game, and everyone tied to him in the offense will succeed as well. I expect plenty of targets for Kelce and probably a touchdown as well. I think he goes over 60 yards against Las Vegas. So I could be wrong. Kelce has burned you this season, but I just think this offense is going to be way too good against Las Vegas. They will put up at least 30+ points. So I do trust him this week. I'm not going to say that every week, but I do think he's a top 10 play. I do think he's worth starting. The upside is pretty high, and according to my intuition, I do think Kelce scores a touchdown. So if you don't believe that, go ahead and bench him. He has not been safe this season. I probably won't rank him top 10 next week, but against Las Vegas, I do think he's a good start. Number 9, 10, and 11 all average the same points per game, so they're kind of all interchangeable. But at number 9, I do have Kyle Pitts at Tampa, and he has a very good track record in this divisional matchup. In 5 career games versus Tampa Bay, he's averaging 63 yards per game against them, and in week 5, he caught 7 receptions for 88 yards. He was very good. So I think his floor is very high this week. He's been consistently involved for Atlanta as well. Since that bagel in week 4, he has at least 59 yards receiving in 4 of his last 5 games. So Pitts is a solid floor play every single week. While I don't think the touchdowns hit, that's never really what he's offered. I think you can trust him. He's worth starting. He's a top 10 tight end this season. So I think he'll be fine this week. The matchup indicates he will play well. At number 10, though, I have Jake Ferguson at San Francisco. And the last time we saw Ferguson versus Detroit, he was not good at all. But the team struggled in general. In his previous 3 games, he had at least 6 catches in each of them, ranging from 49 to 95 yards in those games, but no touchdowns on the year. But off the bye, I expect this offense to click and Dak to keep Ferguson viable for top 10 production every single week. So at some point, the touchdown will happen. He's kind of due for it. Last year, he had the most red zone targets of any tight end in the NFL. And at some point, they will come back to him. So I do think he plays well. Last year, though, against the Niners, he only had 3 catches for 28 yards. It might not be his best game. He might not explode, but at some point he will. So I'm still going to start him every week. I do trust him. He was my ride or die at the position entering the season, and this year he's usually a pretty safe floor play. At number 11, though, very interesting player would be Hunter Henry versus the Jets. And like I mentioned, Kyle Pitts, Jake Ferguson, and Hunter Henry are all averaging 7.3 points per game this season. They have been identical in terms of overall per game stats, but the least consistent of them has been Hunter Henry, so I rank him behind the other 2 for that reason. But the last 2 weeks with Drake Maye at quarterback, he's actually been way better. The upside is there. He's averaging 12.4 points per game with Drake Maye, 7 targets per game, 5.5 catches, 67 yards per game, and a touchdown. He's been fantastic. So I do think he's a legit pickup. I think he'll be good rest of season. He appears to be the number 1 target for the rookie quarterback. So I do trust his floor. The position is very deep all of a sudden, and he is a legit reason why. At number 12, probably think I'm too low on this rank, but he has not been that safe this year. Dalton Kincaid at Seattle is also questionable to play. I think he will be available, but this season he is tied with Travis Kelce with only 6.4 points per game. Nothing to brag about at all. This offense is a bit too random to accurately predict every single week, so he's not been super consistent. With Amari Cooper joining the team, that's even more crowded of an offense as well. And although he's been getting better lately, I still think he's just touchdown dependent. He's all right. I think he'll be fine this week, but to be ranked at number 13, it's really just a testament to the depth at the position. I don't think he's a bad play this week at all, but the ceiling probably doesn't hit. I'm a little worried about the touchdown upside. This week, tight ends 6 through 13, though, kind of feel interchangeable, all in the same tier. I could rank him above Cade Otton, and I could make the case that that's what I should be doing. But at number 12, I think you're probably going to pass this week. There's a lot of really good options. But if you didn't look to the waiver wire, then he probably will remain in your lineup. At number 13, another player that I could rank top 6, but I haven't seen it quite yet this season. He has been disappointing. Sam LaPorta versus Tennessee is possibly a great play, especially with Jameson Williams suspended. There is some more opportunity in this offense, but last week, Jameson Williams did nothing, and LaPorta only had 2 targets. That's been the case for him lately. The volume has not been there. His best game of the season was only on 1 target in that game. So he did catch a 51-yard touchdown a couple weeks ago, but he's been very inconsistent this season. I don't really know why he's not as involved as he was last season, but at the moment, he's just not as safe of a play as he was entering the year. You're probably very disappointed if you drafted LaPorta first overall at the position, but watch him finally have that blow-up game now that I rank him outside the top 10. LaPorta is due for a big blow-up game, and it probably happens here against the Titans. It just hasn't happened yet, and that's why I can't rank him top 10. He has not been a safe play this season. Number 14, really interested in Noah Fant this week versus Buffalo because I'm not expecting DK Metcalf to play, and Fant has actually been really good over his last 5 games. He has caught every single one of his 21 targets in that span. So really consistent in 3 of those games. He has at least 4 catches for 60 plus yards as well. Geno appears to trust him, and he's been throwing like crazy in Ryan Grubb's system. So without Metcalf, I could legitimately envision 8, maybe even 10 targets this week for Noah Fant. If he doesn't drop a pass again, I think that 60-yard floor will hit once again. So I'm not trusting the touchdown to hit. I think the ceiling is a bit capped. However, Fant appears to be bust-proof this week. I think if you are looking to the waiver wire and you did not get Cade Otton or Hunter Henry, Noah Fant is a pretty good consolation prize. Number 15, I have Tucker Kraft at Jacksonville, and Kraft is second in the NFL in tight end touchdowns behind only George Kittle. He's been very good from a ceiling standpoint. He ranks as tight end 4 this season, averaging 8.7 points per game. But the offense will score. It's just kind of hard to predict where it's going every week. And maybe he falls into the end zone once again, but he's only averaging about 4 targets per game. That's not the safest volume to trust. However, this is an excellent matchup against the Jags. They rank top 6 against the position, allowing 11.2 points per game this season and 4 tight end touchdowns on the year. So Kraft could easily score a touchdown again here. I don't think he's a bad play at all, and I kind of feel too low ranking him here, but the position is legitimately loaded all of a sudden. At 16, I finally rank Evan Ingram versus the Packers in the same game as Kraft, but dating back to last year, it's extremely rare that Ingram scores touchdowns. So you're just relying on the target share, and even though he had 5 last week, it just doesn't feel like enough. I don't expect that touchdown to put him over the top. So at tight end 16, I don't think you have to start Ingram this week. Lawrence gets a very bad matchup against the Packers, so other than Brian Thomas, I just don't think I want to trust multiple Jags receivers in this game. At 17, though, I have Pat Freiermuth versus the Giants, who's still a pretty good floor play. He was a lot more effective down the field with Russell Wilson last week. He caught 2 catches for 51 yards. Previously, he was barely cracking like 20 yards the previous 2 games. But it was also the 3rd straight game with only 3 targets. And while he does offer a decent floor this season, he also is a bit touchdown dependent. So without it, the ceiling just isn't there. And at this point in the rankings, I think you should probably bench him. I could see another 8+ points for him, but the volume is not safe enough to bet on. I will probably pass on Freiermuth this week. And number 18, though, I could legitimately see Taysom Hill playing lights out against the Chargers. Taysom practiced in full this week, so he is good to go. And without Rashid Shaheed, this offense does need weapons to step up. But he's really only viable in the run game. That's what you're hoping for. And you're just chasing those rushing touchdowns. The Chargers are not a good matchup on the ground. So I don't think he's going to play lights out, but especially with the backup quarterback Rattler under center, I could also see him get some snaps at quarterback in this game. So he's not a bad streamer at all. It's just a question of, will he stay healthy? He's been out for several weeks now, but he has flashed some upside already a game this year with multiple touchdowns. So it could happen again. I genuinely think he's not the worst option to play this week. At number 19, I also think Dalton Schultz might play well because the matchup is great. We just saw Geno Smith torch them. The Colts are the top 3 matchup this season for opposing tight ends, giving up 11.9 points per game, and that includes 4 touchdowns on the season to tight ends. So that's what you're praying for. You're really hoping that Schultz finds the end zone, but it's been multiple weeks now without Nico Collins on the field, and he has done jack fucking shit. So last week, even though he led the team in yards, he only had 1 catch for 28 yards and was terrible in fantasy. I don't totally trust him, but the matchup indicates you might get an excellent game out of him in this spot. At some point, Stroud and him will connect for a really good game. It could happen this week. Just like Geno Smith last week, I wouldn't put it past him. But now we're getting pretty desperate. We're only chasing matchups and touchdowns. I think you're probably keeping him on the waiver wire. At 20, though, I have Zach Ertz versus Chicago, who's been a decent floor play this week. He also caught his first touchdown last week with Mariota at quarterback. And Washington probably needs to score a lot to keep up with Caleb Williams. So you're not expecting Ertz to score, but it is possible, and he's usually good for 5 targets. The floor isn't terrible with Zach Ertz. These last 5, though, are also kind of tempting as well. Tight end is super deep at the moment. Jonnu Smith just had an excellent game against the Colts, but it was a top 5 matchup. He's likely not going to do it again. I kind of want to see it with Tua before I trust him every week. He's still their 4th option behind Tyreek, A-Chain, and Waddle. At 22, I have Tyler Conklin at New England, who is also in kind of a crowded offense, but Conklin can always get involved. We saw that happen for him in week 3 against the Patriots, where he put up 93 yards on 5 catches. He gets the Patriots again here, so maybe it's another good game, but at this point, tight end 22 probably does not crack your lineup. At 23, we have Isaiah Likely at Cleveland, who's clearly falling behind Mark Andrews at this point, but it still feels like he can pop off any given week for a touchdown, and with Zay Flowers banged up, might not play, that does open the door a little bit 4 more targets. So maybe likely does get back to producing, but at this point, he's just been so inconsistent. I think you can drop him if you haven't done so already. These last 2, though, are kind of a toss-up between which Chargers tight end I think will be the starter. I have Hayden Hurst and Will Dissly back-to-back here. Dissly had the far better game last week. 11 targets, 8 catches, almost 100 yards. He was fantastic. However, Hayden Hurst did not play, and now Will Dissly is not practicing in week 8. So he probably does not suit up. I don't expect him on the field. Meanwhile, Hurst didn't play last week, and now he is practicing. So if that happens, then we saw 19 targets from Herbert to tight ends last week. I would expect Hurst to be their leading target at the position if Dissly cannot go. So that's what I'm chasing, just the volume in this Chargers offense. With all their injuries, the tight ends are getting involved. But at this point, it's way too disgusting. I don't think you're starting either Chargers tight end, but maybe for the second week in a row, one of these players sees double-digit target volume once again. Now let's move on to defense, though, where we're going to try and finish this video quickly, under an hour. That's what I'm trying to chase. Let's get going. At number 1, I have Broncos versus Carolina, and for the second week in a row, they are the top option, and I ranked him here even before Deontay Johnson and Andy Dalton were ruled out. Against Bryce Young, they will dominate for sure. Number 2, I have the Steelers versus the Giants, and Daniel Jones probably gets benched again in this game, so Steelers are a lock in your lineup. Number 3, I have the Chiefs versus Las Vegas on the road, and Raiders are the last team to beat them, so they're definitely getting embarrassed by Kansas City here. Chiefs are a lock. Number 4, I have the Jets at the Patriots, and one of the only teams that they can beat this season. They will get multiple turnovers from the rookie Drake Maye as well. They're a top 5 play in week 8. At number 5, another excellent play would be the Packers at Jacksonville. Jags are terrible. Packers force a shit ton of turnovers this season. They will dominate. They're an excellent fantasy defense this season. Number 6, I have the Chargers versus New Orleans, and Chargers get Rattler at quarterback on the other side. Even though Olave and Taysom Hill are back, New Orleans will probably look just as inept as they did against Denver. Number 7, I have the Ravens at Cleveland, and even Jameis Winston can't save the Browns. The Ravens haven't been great on defense this year, but they are starting to catch more interceptions lately, and they're getting better. The matchup is good. I will trust them as a top 10 play this week. At number 8, I have the Lions versus Tennessee, and I would rank them higher against Will Levis, but Rudolph is still trash. The offense probably looks worse without Hopkins. The Lions should be fine. Number 9, I have the Bears at Washington, and it's such a talented unit on defense. Off the bye, they probably look very good, but against Jayden Daniels, it does scare me a little bit. This Washington offense is legit, so they do deserve a downgrade, but they're still top 10 rest of the season, maybe even top 5, if not for all the divisional matchups still left on their schedule. At 10 is where I rank the Vikings entering Thursday Night Football. I told you they were kind of a downgrade, not the best start, but probably worth keeping in your lineup. And they give up 30 points, so they probably don't finish this high. But I did rank them here at number 10 yesterday. Number 11, I have the 49ers versus Dallas, and they either blow out Dallas this week or it's kind of a close game. And I am a little worried that the Cowboys off the bye do look good on offense. But in the past, they've completely owned them. I'm going to believe that the Niners maintain their dominance against the Cowboys and still put up top 12 numbers on defense this week. At number 12, I have the Texans versus the Colts, and Richardson will make some errors. I do see some turnovers for the Texans here, but this game was very close in week 1 when they shut down Taylor, and I think Taylor will go off in this matchup, as he historically does against Houston. So a little worried about their upside, but the floor should be fine. At 13, I have the Saints at the Chargers, whose offense is not scary. They have caught a lot of interceptions the Saints defense has this year. Number 14, I have the Dolphins versus Arizona, and the Dolphins defense has been playing well in the secondary, but they're bad against the run. At home here, though, they should be okay. Kind of a feel-good game. They'll be good enough to win in Tua's return. Number 15 is where I ranked the Rams entering Thursday night, and I had a feeling they would hold up, but that safety did help them a lot, and they didn't deserve it. So kind of lucked into an 8-point game from the Rams, but it does work out. They're probably going to look good in terms of this overall ranking. 16 and 17, I have the Bucs and Falcons in the same game, and this game is going to be very tight, very close between these two teams, and it's a must win for the Bucs in this divisional standings. They need the win. They can't afford to go 0-2 against Atlanta. So I do think they step up. That's why I rank them higher. It's probably a lower scoring game than the first time around, but the Falcons are right behind them. Baker without his wide receivers probably just isn't going to torch them once again. So Falcons are decent, so are the Bucs, but at 16-17, probably the last defenses I would consider in my lineup. Rest of the way, I would definitely be benching these guys, but the Giants at Pittsburgh, they're not terrible on defense. I just don't trust them. Against Russ, though, he did look good last week. There is some risk against the Steelers. Bills at 19 at Seattle with no DK Metcalf. Geno could force the issue and throw some picks. The offense might not be as good. At 20, I have the Colts at Houston, and the Colts defense has not given me enough confidence, but in division, they could step up. I don't think they give up like 30 points against the Texans here. 21, I have the Seahawks versus Buffalo, and against Josh Allen, I'd rather not press my luck, but they are getting healthy. There is some upside against the traveling Buffalo Bills. At 22, though, I'm definitely benching the Cowboys at the Niners. I'm kind of worried that without Micah Parsons or Deron Bland, they just still suck. Off the bye, maybe they step up, but I doubt it. 23, I have the Bengals versus the Eagles, probably a shootout, so no thank you. Cardinals at Miami. Their defense sucks as well. They just got lucky last week with some turnovers against the Chargers. Panthers at Denver, they have no chance to compete. Patriots versus the Jets, they sucked in the first matchup, so no thank you. Eagles at Cincinnati, probably a shootout, but I would bump them up if T. Higgins was inactive, but no thank you even in that scenario. 28, I have the Commanders versus Chicago, and I don't feel good about their chances of stopping Caleb Williams. And then these last four are all fuck no's for me. Jags versus Packers, fuck no. Titans at Detroit, Raiders versus Chiefs, Browns versus Baltimore. Those are the worst offenses to go up against. So hell no, these are my top 20 rankings for all three positions this week, and that's going to conclude this video. I feel really good about the depth at both quarterback and tight end this week. I genuinely feel like the top 20 all could go off in your lineup at both positions, but you can only start 12 most of the time, so it is what it is. I think Tua's probably the cutoff point. Starting with Kyler, it does start to get a bit more risky at quarterback 13 moving forward, but genuinely the top 25 all the way through Jameis Winston, I think could genuinely put up 20 plus points this week. Quarterback is loaded. And then tight end has some really good matchups beyond the top 10. There's still some players that you have to start based on name value and draft capital, but I could legitimately stream the position this week and have some really good options off the waiver wire. Even Taysom Hill, Dalton Schultz, I think are legit in this game. But at defense, I think once you hit the Bears at number 9, it's kind of dicey. The matchups beyond the Chargers, honestly, are not great. So the top 6 are loaded. The top 12 are kind of the cutoff point. Defense does scare me beyond the top 12. So that's it for me in this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content. It's a long one, but it's been fun. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.